What's going on, y'all? Today's guest is Kamal Moo, an entertainment attorney based in Los Angeles, California, who works with clients such as Janet Jackson, the legendary. And he's also the author of this amazing new book, The Straightforward Guide to the Music Biz. And, it's such a great book. It's a quick read. It's an 80-page book. People always say in the music industry that the Bible of the music industry, the book you have to read, is All You Need to Know About the Music Business by Donald Passman. And it's a great book. It's an amazing book. It's probably the best book when it comes to learning about contracts, dealing with contracts, negotiating contracts, but it's also very dense and legal heavy. And this book right here, everyone should read this at least as an intro to working with producers, working as a songwriter, starting an indie label. There's so much good stuff, how to collect your royalties, everything you need to know, like all the basics is in this book right here. And this was such a fun conversation. I'm really glad that Kamal and his team reached out to me. And this was such a fun conversation. We talk about his journey, how to become an entertainment attorney. We talk about record deals and much, much more. So to learn more about Kamal Moo and this book right here, visit kamalmoo.com. I'll drop a link to that below in the description. Also, while you're looking below, please subscribe to the channel. Really appreciate the support. Also, we'll engage with you in the comments if you have any questions or anything. And thank you all so much for listening, for subscribing. And I hope you enjoy this conversation with the amazing Kamal Moo. Live the life you love. I noticed on your LinkedIn that you went to high school in Miami. Are you originally from Miami, and how did you end up there?
So I was actually born in Jamaica, and then my family moved to Miami when I was 3. So but I grew up there. Yeah, I went to school there. Then I came out to LA for college when I was 18.
Nice. Jamaica. I have to ask because I'm a giant reggae fan. Are you into any music from Jamaica, and who are you into?
Oh yeah, I grew up on reggae music. When I was a kid, I used to go back a lot when I was younger, and so we'd go to reggae festivals and dance halls and stuff like that. So I grew up, of course, with Bob Marley. I remember Buffalo Soldier was one of my favorite songs, but also there's a lot of modern Shabba Ranks and those guys. When I was 12 years old, they were getting really big. So I always stayed up with Jamaican music, for my whole life basically.
That's awesome. Yeah, I'm originally most of my music business background is as a talent buyer, and it's so funny because you would think some of the bigger shows I've got to work on would be my favorites, but one of my favorites of all time was Jimmy Cliff. When we got to book him, I was heaven.
Yeah, he's super talented, Jimmy Cliff. Yeah, Harder They Come is one of my favorite albums too.
Yeah. And I've done a few shows with Toots and the Maytals.
Oh wow,
man, rest in peace, Toots. Such an amazing artist, legend.
Definitely.
Yeah. What made you decide to move to California to go to school? You went to University of Southern Cal for your bachelor's. Why there instead of UM or FIU?
I just wanted to be in LA because, the music industry really is based in LA. Well, LA and New York, but, mostly LA. And I just felt if I was going to try and make it in a serious way in the music business, I needed to be where it was. So, my college counselor actually told me, hey, USC has a music industry program. And I don't even know what USC was, honestly, because I grew up in Miami. So, I didn't really know colleges. And she said, oh, yeah, it's University of Southern California. It's in LA. You can go out there. And then I just, I said, oh, that's a great idea. So that's why I went. And yeah, I've been here ever since.
Awesome. I might mute my mic sometimes. I don't know if you hear babies crying in the background.
I have a 7-month-old, so I get it.
9-month-old. There we go.
Yeah.
We're both in the thick of it. It's awesome. So I've had so many people on the podcast and even people I just talked to in the industry recommend All You Need to Know About the Music Business, and they always say it's the Bible. It's the must read book if you want to be in the music business, but it's also very technical, very legal heavy.
Right.
I would love to learn how many of those people that recommend that book actually read it cover to cover. Because I love this book, the book that you have right here. It's super quick, super short. You read it in a day. And it's a really great intro into all the legal stuff of the music business. Why did you write this book and why now?
Well, the book came to me because, I feel like half my job is explaining a lot of my clients. A lot of my clients, they don't know this stuff, and, they're musicians, and, I get it. Why would you know this stuff? So a lot of it is just me explaining to them certain clauses in contracts, how contracts work, how they're structured. And I felt like I was doing it a lot, over and over again. I actually wrote the book really quickly because in the way that, a lot of those topics, I talk about them all the time. So it was really easy for me to just write it in a simple way. And I used to be an artist manager too. So I know how to talk to artists. I know kind of how they think. I know they don't want the technical jargon. They want it simple and straightforward and, in plain English. And, like you said, the Passman book is a really good book. And I've read it. It was actually one of my textbooks when I was in college studying music industry. However, like, I know what you mean. It is a lot. It's very heavy. It's like 500 pages. I kept mine short, 100 pages. It's just like a primer, like like you said, an introduction. It's not meant to go super in depth, but it's meant to give you at least a broad understanding of the industry and the issues that you're going to face as a musician. So that's kind of where it is. I mean, so that's why that's why I wrote it, because I just feel like there was a need for it. I had a client, I actually had a friend who a few years ago, he was a Grammy Award winning songwriter. He didn't know anything about music publishing. He didn't know where his money was coming from, none of that. So I actually went and sat down with him at a Starbucks one day and just explained music publishing to him. And the thing, so there's people working in the industry who just don't get certain things, like where their money comes from, how their contract works. And so I wanted to sort of give this, write this book for them, so they can really have at least something to look at and say, oh, okay, I understand, at least in a broad way, what this means, what they're getting.
Absolutely. I love it. I'm actually literally thinking about switching it out as the textbook for my music business 2 class. It's much easier to digest. Yeah. Are any schools already picking it up, or was that even like an intention to get it picked up by schools as well?
Well, it's funny because I'm sending it out to some professors and stuff. It just came out a couple of weeks ago, but I have a friend who's been helping with the marketing aspect. He's like, this could be a good like industry book for some college courses, community college. It's less daunting, like you said. It's not something that's going to be overwhelming. And I think that's hopefully people will pick it up. People like you will see oh, this is a lot easier. It's more accessible for the average student, basisally.
Yeah, and I know they'll probably actually read this versus like the 500-page Passman book,
right?
How many pages it is. And also, I think I don't know where I saw, but I think it's like $10 I saw on Amazon maybe. Which
the ebook is $10 and the paperback is $14.99. Yeah.
Awesome. So asking a college student to only pay up to $15 for a book versus the hundreds of dollars they're spending on books, it's awesome. I'm sure they're really excited about that too.
Definitely.
What are some of the biggest misconceptions artists have of music attorneys?
I think that a lot of artists think that they kind of get intimidated by attorneys. I think and I understand, because there are definitely some attorneys out there who are sort of not good with the artist sometimes. I have had plenty of artists come to me and say, oh, my last attorney made me feel like an idiot. He talked down to me and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, look, I'll never do that to you. I think that a good attorney is like, a good teacher as well. You have to make the client understand what they're getting into, make sure they understand the deal. I make sure that my clients understand what's going on in their deals. So I think, there are definitely some attorneys out there who kind of take the approach where they don't really give the artist that time and that respect that they want. And I think there's a stereotype out there sometimes that attorneys are sort of, kind of shady and trying to pull something over on you and not really take care of you. I'm definitely not that kind of attorney. And so I think that's one stereotype I think hopefully will get broken over time.
Absolutely. Yeah. How did your journey in the music industry begin? Like what made you want to get into this industry? Was it something that happened as a kid? Was it a concert experience? Like why choose this business?
Oh, so I actually wanted to be a record producer when I was a kid. I used to love, I was listening to I remember Bad Boy Records was like huge back then with, Puffy and, Puff Daddy. And he had all these artists and like, it was just so cool to me and the music was great. And then I saw what he was doing, like, oh, he's a record producer. That's really cool. So I wanted to do that. I didn't really have the musical talent to be a record producer. I mean, I kind of dabbled, but I'm definitely just don't have the talent for it. And so I said, okay, well, I can try and get in on the business side and, legal side. And that's sort of what motivated me to try and do that instead.
I noticed you also had a few internships before becoming an attorney. Like you interned at Universal Music, BMJ, Arista Records. Why choose to become an attorney instead of like going into the label world or doing anything else? And and I guess tell me about those internships too. Like how did you land those internships, and what, like for the students listening, like what can they do to stand out for an internships like this?
Well, it's funny. When I was in college, so part of the music industry program was you had to do internships. That's part of the degree. So I mean, awesome. They were mandatory, but I still enjoyed it anyway. I mean, I wanted to do those because that's the best way to learn and meet people. Of course, is to be there. So what got me into law really was the fact that all the executives there were like, go to law school. Even the head of BMG Music Publishing at the time, he was the president of the company. He was a lawyer, and he was like, go to law school. And So, they kind of put that in my head. Plus, I was always really strong at writing, and that sort of was easy for me. So it was a natural fit. In terms of getting the internships, honestly, I just called up the companies and said, "Hey, I'm looking for an internship." I'm a student at USC, looking for an internship. And I remember I just went in, and sometimes I interviewed, sometimes I didn't. They said, "Okay, yeah, just come on in and get started." I think the one advice that I would have for kids doing internships, college students, is, just what you're doing might seem menial and boring, which a lot of times it is. You're going to get coffee, you're going to do this, and do that, but do it well, because before they're going to give you more responsibility, they want to see that you're going to do those kind of just menial tasks to the best of your ability. So if they give you 1,000 envelopes to stuff, just do it as quick as you can. Don't think anything is beneath you. I think that's one misconception. People have is oh, well, I'm above this. No, you're not. Everybody's got to start at the bottom. You need to do all those crappy jobs and then just build from there. So, that's the thing. I think people need to just be kind of humble and going in there and just, kind of do what you're asked and not complain about it.
That's really cool that your school required you guys to do internships. I wish that more schools push for that. I know some markets it's hard because you're not in LA, you don't have the music industry exploding everywhere all around you.
Right.
But encourage students to intern at a venue or something. I always say that the concert industry is the ultimate gateway drug to the music industry, because if you're a promoter or work for a venue, you have access to most the entire industry, maybe minus the publishing and copyright side. But as far as managers go, labels, publicists, you're in on the entire industry. So it's cool that they required internships.
Yeah, venues and radio stations, and they're those are local. And you can try and get an internship at your radio station. And that's the thing. Usually it's an unpaid internship, so it's basically free labor for them. And it's as long as you get in there, it's just worth it to meet people. And funny story too. I had one of my when I interned at Arista Records, I worked in the A&R department, and my boss was the assistant to the VP, and she was a very nice woman. And then now, 20 years later, she has her own clearance company. She does music publishing, and I actually reconnected with her a year ago, just randomly through a third party. And then now I kind of call her up because people need publishing admin and stuff like that, and I refer stuff to her all the time now. So it's kind of funny that I was a kid, and now I'm an attorney, and now I'm working with her again. So it's good to, those connections is my point. It's good to make those connections, because you never know. 20 years later, you might meet that person again and work with them. So they're important.
True. So true, right? And it's, I always say as well, you don't never know who's sitting next to you in class or at an internship. They may just seem like an assistant to someone, but in 10, 20 years from now, you might be really excited you kept a good relationship with someone.
Oh yeah, be good with everybody. That's one thing I say. Music industry is 90% relationships, and you have to be good with people. And I've definitely seen people fizzle out because they got a lot of ego. They just were difficult. And, it's about just forming those relationships that, to show that you're a reliable person, you're easy to work with. And that's what's kind of, I've done pretty well because of that. I think I just know how to deal with people and not burn bridges, basically. And that's important.
Tell me a little about your law school journey. Where you went, were you able to pick an entertainment law track or a copyright track, or were there any classes or internships that helped you prepare for law school that maybe surprised you? Wow, this really helped me in this class or in this journey? Tell me about that process, including the LSAT and everything as well.
Okay. Yeah. So I went to Southwestern Law School, which is also here in LA. They've got an entertainment institute, actually. So there's a lot of entertainment classes there. So it took copyright, trademark, music publishing. There's a bunch of, really great classes. And also a lot of people from Southwestern go on to work in the music and entertainment industry in general. There's a lot of film attorneys who went there as well. So that's why I went there, because I really, I like the, just how plugged in they were into the industry. To get in, it was just, the LSAT. I forgot my score that I got. I did okay on it. I just, honestly, in law school, in undergrad, I just wasn't very serious of a student, unfortunately. I worked hard enough. I did okay. I did well, but I could have done more, honestly. And I just didn't take the LSAT very seriously. And I did well enough to get into law school, but it was, it's like a 2-hour exam, it's 2 or 3 hour exam. I can't remember, but it's pretty involved, and you just have to really study for it and take a class. I took a prep class and just learning the tricks and how to take the test. And then, of course, your grades matter too. So you need a good GPA as well, and some letters of recommendation. And and law school is just a whole whirlwind unto itself. It's 3 years, but it went by in the blink of an eye.
How do you, I guess, become an entertainment attorney once you graduate law school? Is that something that you just choose as a specialty? Is that something you prep for like while you're in law school? Like, how does that happen?
So the first year, you don't really have much say in what classes you take. It's they just kind of give you your schedule basically. But then in second and third year, you specialize. So then you take the first thing you're going to take is copyright law. That's kind of the basis of everything in entertainment.
Mm-hmm.
So copyright law, and then you sort of take other classes geared towards that. So then, at my law school, they had record contract negotiations. I'm actually teaching the music publishing class in the spring over Zoom, actually.
Oh, awesome.
And I taught it in person in 2016 as well. So, then you kind of take those classes and get that familiar, and then hopefully get some internships in college when you're there. I mean, sorry, in law school. They call them externships when you're in law school, or some kind of clerk positions, and then learn on the job. And then once you get out and pass the bar exam, of course you have to pass the bar. That's a whole mountain to climb on its own. But then after the bar exam, then, the thing is, once you get out of law school, you don't, the theory, but you don't have the practical, like the practical aspect of it. You have to learn that stuff too. So at that point, you either hopefully will go apprentice somewhere, maybe get a job as an associate at a law firm and learn that way. I learned, I worked at I did an externship in my third year at this law firm called Carroll, Guido and Groffman, which is, at the time, especially, they represented Jay-Z and a bunch of big artists, and they just did mainly music. So I learned from the paralegal there how to do like the rubber meets the road stuff, how to draft a proper letter, how to, just make sure the contract is all like ready to go for a client to sign, just all the like the little, practical things. And then after that, I mean, it's just a matter of learning and hustling and getting clients. It's always a hustle. I mean, entertainment is always a hustle. You always have to like work hard and just meet people. And, so right now, my main client is Janet Jackson. So I do all of her, contracts. She has an attorney in the UK. She actually lives in the UK, but I do all of her contracts over here. And like, getting her as a client, that just took a lot of hard work, and then building relationships, and then finally got to the point where someone recommended me to her. And then, but it's a process, so you have to think about that as you go. You have to just learn how to just do a good job, and just learn how to build your network, and then just, try and then eventually you'll make it. It's a long road though. It takes a lot of guts and perseverance, and because there's a lot of other areas of law that are kind of easier to get into. There's trying to get into litigation or immigration law, other things, but entertainment's so specialized and small that it's really hard to break in. So it takes time.
Tell me about your first client. How'd you find, you don't have to say who it is, but how'd you find your first client, or how did they find you? And what was the job for?
Oh man, it was so to back up a little bit. So I graduated law school, passed the bar exam. My first gig out of the gate was actually working as a manager for my brother's band.
Okay.
So my brother's band, actually, back when MySpace was big in 2007, they had a band on there, and they were getting like 50,000 plays a day, because they did like a Soulja Boy hip hop cover, but they were like a screaming rock band. So they did like a screamo rock version. It was getting 50,000 plays a day. So they were getting a lot of attention. And MySpace kept on deleting their page because they thought they were using bots to like increase the plays. And that happened like 3 times. And they were going to give up. And I said, guys, you have something here. So I said, let me manage you. So I stepped in. I got the page back. I got in touch with MySpace, and then we got a record deal, and they went and did an album. They went on tour. So that was kind of my first gig in the music business, was managing my brother's band.
Okay.
And then that was from about 2007 to 2010. I managed them. Then they broke up, and then I started my law practice in 2010.
Let me throw in a tangent question real quick.
Sure.
How has law school helped you as a manager? And then how has being a manager helped you for what you do now?
So it's funny, like I always say, like, so law school was very helpful in just understanding the theory of it all. That's just like looking at contracts and knowing how to analyze things. They say that law school, they don't really just teach you the law, they teach you how to think like a lawyer. And that's what you're going there for. You're learning how to approach problems in a certain way. And so that's always super helpful. I mean, even now in my personal life, like I'm refinancing my mortgage, and like, just having a law degree helps, because it helps me look at things and understand them better. On the management side, it really helps too, because I always say that like a lot of lawyers do the deal and walk away, but I did the deal as a manager and lived with it for years,
Yeah.
So I got really familiar with what was practical, what worked. So even now, today as a lawyer, having been out on the road, I mean, I sold merch on tour. I went on tour with them. I was driving the tour van through Wyoming in a blizzard at 4 a.m. one time. Like I've been in the trenches, out there doing it in like a tour. So I understand the concerns, and I know how it works.
Mm-hmm.
So when I draft a contract, I try and keep it as practical as possible. It's like, okay, well, that's not going to work because X, Y, and Z, you know, because it's my practical aspect. So being a manager was really helpful in helping to inform my, you know, me as an attorney and how to like draft these contracts and how to put things together. So,
Yeah. So let's go back to your first client when you started your firm.
I think it was a record producer. He was trying to do a deal. Man, that was a long time. It's like 10 years ago. But it was a record producer and he just needed a deal done. I didn't charge him much money because it was my first, like I'd been doing contracts with the band, but not as an attorney, you know, I mean, they had attorneys and I kind of learned from them. And yeah, it was just, I think I charged like $150. Like it was just like no money, but I just had to get my feet wet and it was my first client and had to get it done. Looking back now, it's like, of course, like anything, you do something for 10 years, you get much better at it. So now it's like,
hopefully, right?
there's no music contract that I haven't seen or haven't worked on, or, you know, so I could do a lot of these things, you know, really easily now. But back then it was more like I was way more paranoid about like, am I doing this right? You know? So, you know, that's the difference now, definitely.
And how to tell me about a little bit about the process of going from this first client to like working with someone like Janet Jackson. Like how, I guess tell me like a little bit about like how quickly did the business build up? Like was it mostly word of mouth? Did you do any marketing? Like how do people find out about you? Because imagine in LA there's attorneys everywhere.
Right. In the beginning, it was hard. I mean, like when you start any business, it's a slog, you know, it's hard. I mean, we didn't have much going on. I had a partner in the firm and he did bankruptcy law. So I was helping him with that. And I was helping him with the bankruptcy stuff. And then we were trying to get some music clients as well. And, you know, we're trying to build on that. One thing that we had in our advantage was that my partner also was really good with marketing and SEO, because ever since college, he'd kind of dabbled in websites and stuff. So he built us a website, which still exists today. I mean, that's where I get some leads from once in a while. He built the website and he just optimized it for search, and that helped. And because not a lot of attorneys were doing that at the time. So that helped us get some business in the door. But it was tough. I mean, it was just basically, you know, just trying to get through, you know, each month and say, okay, let's try and get some clients in and build from there. But then, you know, like anything else, if you stick it out and you're able to make money, it starts to build on itself. Because at this point now, most of my new clients come from referrals, because it's like, oh yeah, I worked with that person and, you know, they send somebody my way, or I have like other attorneys that I co-counsel matters with. I have an attorney who's great, and she does a lot of film, but we work on a lot of music stuff together and independent film. So like she'll bring some stuff to me, and, you know, so nowadays it's like I've built my network up basically to get referrals. And that's kind of with Janet too. I mean, I what happened there was I had a client a number of years ago who was he was starting a label. And it didn't work out because the investor just didn't work out. And so he you know, I said, look, man, just stay in touch and it's all good. And, you know, and then a couple years ago, he was like, hey, I'm working with Janet Jackson and, you know, like, you know, all this. And he's like, oh, do you want to, and she needs an attorney. And I said, oh, okay, great. So then he introduced me and I actually mainly work with her manager, who's her brother, Randy. So I mainly work with him, but it's, it's one of those things that's like, you know, I could have never planned that, you know, I just did good work and stayed in touch and kept good relationships, and, you know, then it ended up there. So now I'm just trying to, you know, just keep on building on that.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's like a dream client to have. I mean, probably, I don't know, I can imagine maybe potentially a lot of work, but definitely a dream client to have.
She's great.
Yeah,
no, she's great. She's a great client. She's very easy to work with, real friendly, and she's not a diva at all. You know, it's very, and her brother's great too. They're very down to earth people. So I really enjoy working with them.
that's awesome. That's cool to hear. What types of clients do you typically represent? Is it mostly artists? Or do you also work with labels, managers? Like what's your client roster like look like?
Kind of all of the above, honestly. Yeah, I work with artists, songwriters, managers, producers. I have some record labels, like independent record labels I represent too. So I, you know, do their deals. So it's a little bit kind of all over the place. It's a little bit of everybody. It's kind of grown over the years too. Like I said, mainly in the beginning it was like artists, but now it's just like expanded to all just different areas.
Very cool. So I have a two-part question. A friend of mine who was on a podcast as well, he's also an entertainment attorney. His name is Matt Cottingham. He said whenever you're presented with something that you need to sign, like has words on it, you should consult with an attorney. But not a lot of artists do that. I've come in as an artist manager and I've seen all the contracts they signed before me. I'm like, oh my God, why'd you never talk to an attorney? So like, when do artists typically reach out to you for the first time for help? Like, what are they usually currently struggling with, and maybe what kind of baggage is usually attached with that?
Typically, I'll get an email saying, "Hey, I was offered this deal from this label, and how much would you charge me to look at it?" And I usually just say, "Well, send it to me, and I'll take a quick look first and let you know based on how long it is and how complex it is. Then I'll give them a quote based on that." Sometimes I'll do flat fees for that too, just because if they want me to give them a rundown, I'll just write a memo saying, "Okay, well, this is what you're getting," and just like a breakdown. Yeah, the best time is honestly that time. I've had clients come to me after the fact, after they've signed a crappy deal, and I'm like, guys, I can't really do much for you now. I mean, you've already signed this, you're in it. At that point, the only way to get out of it is to negotiate a termination with the company or sue them to try and get out because you think they breached the contract. Those are realistically the only two ways you're going to get out of it. And that's just, it's hard, and I always tell people at that point, it's like trying to unscramble an egg, like it's just not possible, so the best time to do it is spend a little bit of money, and I keep my rates affordable. I mean, it depends, like, if it's a huge deal, then of course the rates are going to be adjusted according to that. But like, I work with a lot of indie artists who don't have a ton of money, and I get it, it's tight. So I'll try and come up with some, like a quote for them that's affordable, that's not going to break the bank. But it's worth it, to protect yourself, because you don't want to get stuck in a contract for years that, you're going to regret being in. And so, yeah, always, I completely agree. Whenever you get a contract or anything, call a lawyer, call a qualified lawyer.
Absolutely. And an entertainment attorney, right?
Yes. And that's the thing too. You don't go to a real estate lawyer or like, your cousin who does, like personal injury, like go to an entertainment attorney, music lawyer, film lawyer, whatever it is. Because I always say too, it's like, you don't go to a foot doctor for heart surgery, right? Like, we kind of specialize, and that's what you need. You need to go to someone who knows what they're doing.
And like you mentioned, a lot of artists are definitely intimidated when they're approaching an attorney for the first time, because they think, just as in all industries, like they think lawyers, can I trust a lawyer? And like, are they going to charge me? Like, how much are they going to charge me? This is going to cost hundreds of dollars. Like, I'm just going to do it on my own. Like, what advice would you give to those indie artists that are struggling financially? And like, I guess, don't necessarily have to give me rates, but like, what can they typically expect? Is it mostly just flat fees? Do some attorneys work on percentages? Like, what are the different business methods or payments methods with attorneys?
Yeah, so usually, when it comes to indie artist who's like, like a small indie artist, it's either I charge a flat fee to help review the contract, like I mentioned, or if it's like they're getting signed to a label, sometimes I'll do a percentage deal. A lot of times too, the label will build the attorney fee into the contract itself. So it's like, okay, you're reviewing, and because the label, usually if it's a reputable label, they want the artist to have a lawyer on their side, so it's a fair deal. So a lot of times they'll build the lawyer fee into the contract. So I'll get paid directly from the label after the deal closes. So that's one way to do it too. So it's nothing that the lawyer, the attorneys, the client's not paying out of their own pocket. But of course that's in a recoupable advance because, the label's paying it. So they're going to recoup that money later on, but at least it's not money you're paying right now as the artist. So that's one way to handle it as well.
Now, does an artist need to be concerned about potential conflict of interest or anything if the label is paying it? Like, are the artists still finding the attorney, or like, how does that work when the label's paying for it?
Yeah. So, you should always find your own attorney. I mean, sometimes if a label recommend one, that doesn't mean there's necessarily a conflict of interest, but just find your own attorney. But in that case, it's funny because the attorney compensation is part of the deal. It's not like they're hiring me to represent you and then my loyalties are split. It's like if the deal closes, then I get paid basically. But I'm still ethically bound to represent the client as represent their interests basically. So ethically, I know that they're my client, and then I only get paid, if the deal closes. So I don't take any direction from the label in that case, and they understand that. I'm not going to look out for their interests. So yeah, it's pretty common actually.
And I listened to your interview with Rick Barker, and I heard him talk about production deals and how they're usually like a bad idea. Tell me, like, tell the listeners, and anything that we're talking about that's not like legally focused is not legal advice. This is just educational purposes. So definitely still consult an attorney, even though you might hear some really good advice in this conversation. You still always talk to someone. But in that conversation with Rick, he talked about production deals. Like, tell me, what are production deals, and what are some red flags that artists should look for in those?
So production deal is like, let's say a record producer or some other person starting like a small label or production company. They don't really have much money, so they're not going to put out your records themselves, or they don't have distribution. So they say, hey, sign with my production company. I'm going to produce you an album. and then I'm going to try and shop it around for distribution or get you signed somewhere. Then I'm going to get a piece of your advance or whatever. And then you're, kind of, and then there's an exclusivity period too. So you sign with them. It's like, okay, I have like a year, 2 years, whatever. And then maybe they have options for multiple albums. So it's like, okay, we did one album, we're gonna do another one. Like in my experience, like those are a little bit dicey because there's no guarantee your music's ever gonna get released. There's usually not much money involved. They're not really going to pay you much in advance. You're tied up with this company for a while. You're unable to go sign with somebody else. So you have to be really careful with those. You need to try and limit them. Say, okay, well, I'm going to do one album for you, but you only have like a year or 6 months, whatever, to try and shop it around. Otherwise, I'm free again. I can do what I want. So it's a little tricky. I think that, and the other thing is too, like you have to trust that there's value there. Like, can this producer, can this small production company owner like get you where you need to be? That's another issue as well. And then also too, if you sign a record deal based off of that, then you're sharing that pie with this production company, so you're going to be tied to them for a really long time. So even yesterday I had a client come in who, as a manager actually, whose client was offered a production deal, and it was like that. And I was like, well, what are you getting out of this? I mean, there's really not much you're getting out of this other than, they're going to do some tracks for you, but you're really tied to them. You're tying yourself to them for a long time. And it may not to be to your benefit, because who are they? Like, are they going to really do anything for you? So that, it's a little dangerous. You have to be careful there. So that I'd look out for that, and definitely get an attorney, like you said. Always get an attorney. Anything put in front of you, get a good attorney to look at it. Don't just sign it, because you could regret it for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Before we started recording, we talked about like Kanye West and like all the contracts that he posted on his Twitter page, and he actually talked about you had a course or something, or a seminar about his contract at UM. So I'm curious, I guess this is kind of a basic question, but in the contract, it was basically a 7-album deal as a first album with 6 options. Explain, I guess, to listeners what options are and what's the typical amount of options between like major labels and indie labels.
So what happens is, when you sign a record contract, usually what's going to happen is you're going to have one album that you're going to be guaranteed they're going to record. So they're going to pay for recording one album. If the album does well, they're going to exercise an option for a second album. And then if that does well, they'll do a third album. So they're not guaranteeing that they're going to produce these option albums. The label can say, okay, this last album did well, we're going to exercise the option for another one. And that's how you do multiple albums under one contract. Usually for the artist, you want to try and keep the options as small as possible. So ideally, under like independent record deals, it's usually one album plus an option for 1 to 2 more. Major labels, they'll do like, they want like 6 or 7 to sort of really extend the contract. So it's that's what it is. That's what an option album is. And the thing is, it's at the label's discretion. Like, they decide whether or not, the artist has no say. It's like the label will say, okay, well, we're picking up the option for the next one, and the artist is kind of stuck and they have to record it, basically.
Yeah, for sure. It's definitely all the advantages to the label there. What happens if someone doesn't want to, I guess, deliver an album to the label? What if they just decide they're going to record an album on their own and they're going to just release it independently? Like, what is the worst that can happen?
So when you sign a record contract, there's an exclusivity clause saying that anything that you record during the term of the contract, which is how long the contract lasts for, automatically belongs to the label. And it's like a work for hire, basically. So you can't just like record something on your own and put it out there, because technically speaking, your label owns that recording.
Yeah.
So you have to be careful about that, because if you do that, then they could sue you for that, and try and say, well, we actually own this. We have a contract with you, and that's actually our album, and all the money you're making from that belongs to us. And then it has to run through our royalty system, and that's how you get paid. So you have to be careful about that, and just understand that when you sign with the label, everything you make belongs to them, basically.
And the main reason I asked that, because just because you sign with a label doesn't mean you actually ever release an album. You can just be put on the shelf for a while or even longer. Ari Hurston, I've been familiar with his book, but I think it's a crazy statistic, like something like 90% of artists that sign with major labels actually never release an album. Like, how do you protect yourself from that?
Well, and that's an interesting point, because there's a couple things there. I had an artist who, she signed with an indie label, and I did the deal for her. Excellent deal. The numbers were great, everything. She signed the deal. Nothing happened for 2 years. They put her on the shelf and nothing happened. She sat around. And it was terrible, because she was just basically stuck. And one thing that I try and say is, like, you can try and build in some triggers in there so you can get out. So for example, start off with a single and say, okay, this label is going to have you do a single, put it out. If it does well, then they'll pick up an EP or an album option after that. But then say, okay, but then you have to exercise that within a certain amount of time, that option. Usually there's a time period. So try and make that as short as possible. Try and limit the number of options. Just try and put certain points in there where they have to exercise and pay you some more money, or you get to just basically terminate the contract. Now, of course, it depends on leverage. If you don't have any leverage, good luck. You're not going to get those things. But if you're out there and you're making good money yourself, you're selling records, you're doing well, it's like you can have some leverage there and say, okay, well, I don't want to get locked in this thing for too long. But if you're making money, they're going to probably want to work with you and figure something out. So that's what it is. A lot of artists. The other thing too, and this is really important, I always tell people, look, the contract says what it says, but ultimately you have to kind of judge the people you're working with on the other side. Are they going to do well by you? Like, what reputation does the label have for taking care of the artist, making sure records are put out properly? Because the contract could be excellent, like that client that I had, but if the people aren't willing to do anything, they're not motivated, then it's not worth it. It's just not worth it. So I always say, take the measure of who you're working with, the enthusiasm, the reputation, before you jump into anything. And that's always really important.
Talked about leverage. Like, what kind of value can an artist bring to a potential label deal? So I guess if you were in your most ideal scenario, if you were advising an artist that's maybe you're managing, maybe they just have some kind of interest in them succeeding and getting a really good deal, should they work towards earning some kind of amount of income per year before they even approach labels? Should they have a certain amount of followers on social media? Like, what are some metrics that really will give you some leverage in negotiating these deals?
It's funny, in the ideal situation, the label is going to come to you.
Right.
Right, because, for example, like my brother's band, on MySpace, they were just doing so well on their own that the labels are coming to them and trying to make a deal. So then you have some leverage, because it's not like you trying to go to them and get something out of them. It's all of that. It's like, are you making money? How's your social media presence? Are you making money from social media? Are you, are you an influencer? All those things, make sense. It's like, is there money being generated, basically? In the best case scenario, it's like, I always tell clients, if you can start your own label, fund your own recordings, put them out there and make money with them, then you just go do a distribution deal, because then you keep the lion's share of the money. You don't really need a traditional record deal at that point, because the difference really is, with a traditional record deal, the record label is funding your recording, they're funding the marketing, they're doing all that stuff. But that comes with conditions. Like, they're going to want to own the recordings because they're paying for them, which makes sense. If you're paying for something, you want to own it. If you can fund the recordings yourself, then they're yours, and you just license them out for, sale, basically. So you keep the lion's share of the money, and then you retain ownership of the masters. And it's all about risk, right? Risk mitigation. So that's what I always tell clients. Is like, the best case scenario, you fund your own stuff, you do well, and then you're in a really good position to make a deal, because then you have a lot of leverage.
I love that you said that once the label comes to you, that's like the most ideal scenario, because and that's what I say really about anyone in the industry, right? Of course, sometimes you need to like nudge someone and they make sure they're aware that you exist, but like I always say, you're ready for a manager, an agent, and label, whatever, when they approach you, because most people in the industry, they're paying attention. Like a manager and an agent, and a promoter, they're paying attention of how well artists are selling tickets at venues and stuff. They're paying attention to how many shows they're playing or how often they're playing. Like, if they see a name over and over again, they're gonna start paying attention to that. And when you're really ready, they're coming to you.
Oh yeah. No, when you start, like, because the thing is, I think people think that people at record labels are people of these ivory towers who don't know what's going on, but they're out there. They're in the street. They're listening to stuff. They're like on SoundCloud. They're checking things out. They're seeing who has action, who's got heat going on, and they're tracking those people. So it's not like, they know what's going on. So if you can make noise on your own, then that's going to really get their attention, right away. So that's the best strategy.
Yeah. So this year, this is going to go a little bit along the lines of like ownership, like of your owning your masters. So this year I've gotten as many people, definitely a little more politically involved. I've always identified as someone that's a libertarian. And I feel like that comes along with actually reading the Constitution and reading all these crazy books from history, like the Anti-Federalist Papers and Federalist Papers and so on. But I'm trying to figure out a way now to really incorporate that into the podcast and like be a voice of liberty for the music industry. So I know libertarians are big on like owning your stuff. So talking about like your masters. One of the messages that I'm starting to put out there more consistently is artists fighting to own their masters. And trying to, the reason these crappy deals exist is because artists are signing them. But once they stop signing those deals and maybe like are working towards maybe a label leasing a master versus owning it, and I've seen a deal from an indie label like that. I feel like that's a way to change the industry. Is this something you're starting to see happen more, where labels are actually leasing the master until for a certain amount of time or until it's recouped? Or what are your thoughts on that versus a label just straight up owning your masters?
Well, and that's like a distribution deal, basically, So in a distribution scenario, for example, let's say I create my recordings and then I go do a deal with a distributor, and and because these labels are distributors too, like Universal, Warner, like they have distribution, arms. And if I go to them and say, hey, and so let's say I put out a recording myself on DistroKid or whatever, it blows up, it's making like $500,000. Then it's like, well, they're going to come and do a deal with me. It's like, okay, I'll do a distribution deal with you, and then they'll have exclusive rights to distribute the master for a certain amount of time till if they give me advance, they give advance gets recouped, but then I get the lion's share. Usually it's like I get 75% of the income in that case, sometimes up to 80%. But then again, like I said, I took the risk of producing the master myself and putting it out there. It's all about, like, if you're taking someone's money, they're gonna wanna own what they're paying for. Like I said, I mean, I always say, like, if I pay a contractor to build a house, I want to own that house, right? Like,
yeah, absolutely.
So it's about risk mitigation, because a lot of times, see, what happens is, like, the labels, they're putting out all this money, but if the project makes no money whatsoever, they're out that money. They've lost that money. It's a write-off for them, and the artist just walks away because there's no duty for the artist to pay back out of their own pocket, right? So it's risk, right? It's all about the risk and, like, profitability. And so in these cases, like, I agree, like, I tell my clients, I'm like, you don't need a record label like you used to. Like, you can do, if you can produce your own masters and put them out yourself, then you're in a much better position, and then you get a label partner when you need one. But that's what it's about. It's like, you can own it nowadays way more easier than you used to, because in the old days, I mean, you had no choice. I mean, recording studios back then, I mean, there was only certain ways to, like, make and put out a recording, but now everything's a little bit more democratized because of the internet, so it's a lot easier nowadays. That's basically, that's why I tell my clients, don't rush to get a record deal. It's not going to solve your problems. You need to put in the work and build your own thing, and then, like, once you're successful, then you're in a good position to do a distribution deal. So yeah, I agree with you. I think that's a good approach.
On a distribution deal, do you, like, I guess, what are there any kind of advances? Is it advances towards marketing? Is there any advances towards actual cost of creating the album? Like, what is a distribution deal? How is that different from a record deal?
So with a record deal, they're paying for the production of the recordings. They're paying for the marketing. They're paying for everything, basically. With a distribution deal, they're basically putting it out there. They may give you an advance, but at that point, like, the recording's already made, basically.
Right.
They're giving you advance, and then you can use that. And they usually have some marketing too. So they might have a marketing team. They might help you try and get on the Spotify playlist. They might try and help you, get some other attention. But it's kind of like the work's already done at that point, right? The recording is kind of made, or you have a track record. So it's like, hey, like, so for example, with Janet, like, she has her own record label, and then she does distribution deals. That's what it is. Like, because she has a track record of, like, a fan base, So it's it depends on, like, where you are and what leverage you have, and if it makes sense for you to do that. So a distribution deal is a great position to be in, but getting there is, like, another story. You have to kind of prove yourself first.
Sure, absolutely. I'm not sure how plugged in you are into, like, the digital marketing world. I'm seeing you making the rounds of all the podcasts that I pay attention to. I don't know if you're familiar with Creative Juice, but it's a very marketing focused music business podcast. Like, it's pretty much all, like, marketing, customer journeys, and learning how to, like, build Facebook ads and funnels and all that. If an artist has, like, a really good marketing strategy, they got labels' attention because of their marketing, how good they're at it. On a distribution deal, is there an opportunity maybe to get, like, some money for just marketing? Like, if you have a proven track record for your marketing, and you just, like, kind of need that extra oomph, like, to take your album to the next level with having more marketing dollars?
Yeah, it depends on what you need as an artist. I mean, if you're really good at marketing, you can they can help supplement that, basically, and step in and say, okay, well, we can help get you on radio, for example, because obviously it's really hard to get on radio, and we can try and help you there. So there's different, ways they can sort of plug into the equation. I think that, but marketing can make or break, an artist, as I mean, that's like, you can have the greatest album ever, but if you don't have a marketing plan, then, no one hears it, then what's the point, right? Like, it's not going to get out there. So, that's always to me, that's always one of the hardest things, is just having effective marketing and then finding a label that understands how they can jump on board and help you with the marketing. Also now, especially since there's so much music out there all the time, like anybody can release their stuff on Spotify and, Apple Music and SoundCloud. And it's like, it's not, the barrier to entry is super low, but that means you have to work that much harder to stand out from the crowd.
Absolutely.
Which is, it's tough, and that's where good marketing is really the key, to success.
Yeah. And one more like music liberty question. So another thing I'm trying to encourage artists to push back on too is like managers taking commissions off of gross income. There should be some kind of deduction that the artist fights for. And I don't know if you're starting to see like more deductions or maybe commissions off of net, but what are some things that artists should fight for that either managers don't commission off of or that might get deducted from the top?
Well, most good management contracts will say, yeah, I'm getting a percentage of gross. However, there will be exclusions. So it's like, for example, for touring, sound and lights expenses. I always, like when I was a manager, let's say we played a show, I let the agent take his cut off the top, and then I'll commission what was left, instead of the whole thing. Because I just thought that was fair. So I tend to work with my artists when I was a manager and just say, okay, well, we'll take these expenses off the top because those are necessary. And I'll usually, but of course, like if you get an advance from a record label, the manager's going to take a piece of that and so forth. So it's all about the definition of what gross earnings or gross income is in the contract. And then you try and build in those exclusions. I think most fair-minded managers understand, like why, you need to pay for sound and lights, you need to pay for transportation to get to the gig and so forth. So, most of them, if they're fair, they'll understand that and not commission off the top like that.
Yeah. Especially when it's even a theater tour. So I worked for AEG for 2 years, and I did everything from their club shows to theaters, amphitheaters, arenas. And, sound and lights is expensive. Like sometimes you're spending 10 to 15 grand a show. And then if you have 2 semi trucks and 3 tour buses, and that's a small scale. I mean, if you're in Taylor Swift, it's 40 trucks and 40 buses, but those are about $1,000 a day. And those seem like reasonable things to deduct off the top, because that's necessary for touring and putting these big productions on.
Yeah, and that's not money going to the artist's pocket. That's for also too, if there's money, let's say that's specifically for recording, you shouldn't. So an advance, like an in-pocket advance for an artist, definitely commission that as a manager. But if the money is specifically for recording costs and the artist doesn't get that in their pocket, then the manager shouldn't commission that, because that's not fair either. So it depends on if it's really going in the artist's pocket or not.
Exactly. Yeah, I agree. At what point should an artist walk away from a deal?
When the label let him out of the deal. It's hard because, like I said, sometimes, the only way out of it is to negotiate a termination or take them to court if they think that if they breach the contract, but that's a really expensive route, of course. Sure, yeah. So termination is really the best way to go. I always say, like, if things have deteriorated to the point where the artist is really unhappy about being on the label, why does the label want to keep them around? Right. They're not going to do good work. They're not going to be cooperative. Right. But so what happens at that point is, like, they'll negotiate some kind of termination. And most of the major labels, especially, they're pretty good about that. I mean, they're not going to, what will happen usually is that the termination will say, okay, we'll let you go, but we want a percentage of your next project. And it's not going to be anything crazy, but like a little piece of your next advance or whatever. And that's usually how it looks. But I think it's like, look, if you just can't work with the label anymore and they're just terrible and, creatively you're being stifled, then I mean, just try and have that conversation and try and get out of it. But it's tough. It's tough. You have to, that's why I'm saying, like, going into it, you need to really measure the people, like the character of the people you're working with. And if you can really work with them for the long haul, because you're going to be with them for years, so that's important.
Yeah, that was really good what you just mentioned. I probably should have been a little more specific. What I did mean is, at what point should you walk away from a deal when you're negotiating a deal? Like, at what point do you sorry, okay. That's okay. No, those was good. The answer you just gave me too. But yeah, at what point, if you're negotiating a deal, like, should you just be like, you know what, these are some red flags, I'm walking away?
Yeah, no, I always say don't ignore the red flags. It's like dating, right? Like, you start to go out with somebody and then, like, you start to see some red flags. You just don't ignore those because they don't get better over time, right? Yeah. but I think that, for example, if the deal is very onerous, like they're not giving you any advance, they're not going to tell you how much they're going to spend on the recordings. They're not making any guarantees in terms of marketing funds. Those are little things that are sort of red flags. And also, like I said, too, you have to sort of look at the reputation of the label and are they going to do well by the artist? Because, I mean, it might be fine if they leave that stuff out if they have a good reputation for treating artists well and promoting projects properly. But I think that, like, you just have to have your point. Don't just be sucked in by the allure of like, oh, I'm getting a record deal. Yeah. It has to make sense, right? And if it's just not making sense for you, then, know your value, know what you bring to the table. Like, for example, like I said, if you're already successful in making money on your own, don't shortchange yourself just because you think a label is going to help you make $10 million. Really look at it and say, does this make sense for me at this point? So don't be afraid to walk away. I honestly, I've never seen an artist walk away from a deal and regret it. It's more like, oh, well, because if they're already going in a good direction, then, I think good things will happen for them.
Mm-hmm. And like, I might clip this question out as a separate piece of content, but one thing I want to speak to as well, because like some artists that probably need to hear this, like are probably not listening to these types of podcasts. And I've seen so many artists just get completely taken advantage of, especially, I mean, it happens in all genres, but especially like hip hop, like when someone is coming from just like a less fortunate place, and when that label comes around and waves those big dollar signs in front of you, and might be a horrible deal, but man, you just really need some money right now. Like you need that break. Like you've been working so hard for so many years, and now all of a sudden someone's willing to drop a big check on you. Like what advice would you give to those artists?
It's a hard place to be. I've had clients like that who are just super broke, and then they're getting, there's a deal, they're going to pay us a little bit of money. And, it's really, it's tough because like, I understand that obviously everybody needs money to live, but at the same time, it's like, you have to think long-term, if it's, let's say it's not the right deal, can you kind of gut it out a little bit longer, which I know not everyone can. So it's hard. It's really hard. You have to really look at the situation and say, is this going to really get me to where I want to be, or at least put me in a better position to get where I want to be? And it's there's no really right answer. It really depends on the situation and your particular circumstance and who's offering you the deal. Like, what do you have going for you at the time? Do you have a single out that's doing really well? Do you have some leverage? Maybe you want to wait a little bit longer, see if something better comes along. So that's what I'd say. It's just, try and be patient as much as you can, even though I understand there's a lot of real pressures out there in the world that like patience is a luxury sometimes. Right. So yeah. So I mean, sorry that the answer is pretty vague, but that's really the best answer I can give.
No, I think that's great because patience is a really big thing, right? If someone offers you a deal and it's like your first deal that you've ever been offered, the chances are pretty high. Not always, it's not guaranteed, but chances are pretty high that another deal's around the corner.
Yeah, I mean, it means that you've got something there that someone feels they can make money from, and that's what it is. So you have to say, okay, well, hopefully there'll be others coming. And like my brother's band, for example, like I said, they were getting like deals left and right. They were getting approached by labels left and right. But there was the label they signed with was Epitaph Records, a big indie label. Mm-hmm. And they stepped up and made a good offer. And he was like, guys, this makes a lot of sense. Let's do this. And, and they were a really good label. They treated us well and they have a good reputation. So it worked out for my brother's band. But you have to be careful because there's some really, disreputable kind of labels out there you have to watch out for. And you have to be careful. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, can you mention this? I don't know if you're allowed to mention this, but what was your brother's band?
Oh yeah, they're called I Set My Friends on Fire.
Oh yeah, wow. I remember them.
Yeah, they so I managed them and they don't. I mean, my brother's not in the band anymore, but the other guy. There's only two guys in the band, and my brother quit, and then the other guy has it still going now. But yeah, they released an album together, and then then my brother just got sick of it. He's just not the type to kind of. He doesn't like touring. I mean, he enjoyed it for what it was, but it's a hard life, and it just really wasn't for him. And but it was a lot of fun. The whole project was a lot of fun.
That's cool. Yeah, touring's rough. definitely rough on you.
It's very hard.
Let me throw in like two quick fun questions, and then I'll throw in my last question I ask everyone. But tell me about the first concert experience you've had. Like, what was the first live concert you've been to, or first memorable concert?
The first concert I went to, I was 12 years old. My cousin took me. It was Diggable Planets, and they had this song called "Rebirth of Slick." They're like a hip hop group in the '90s. And there's a song, they had a big hit called The Rebirth of Slick. And there's sort of, like I really enjoyed it. I was all freaking out because I was like a 12-year-old. So I was happy to be out somewhere at a venue. That was my first concert.
That's awesome. Was that in South Florida?
And it's in Florida, the Cameo Theater in South Florida.
Oh yeah, I remember that. Yeah. What are the books, documentaries, or podcasts you share the most?
About the music industry, like in general, or
I'm gonna leave it open. Can be music industry or both.
oh man. um, I try to think like that's a really good question. Because I read a lot, but it's funny because I read a lot of fiction and stuff just to kind of get away from all this. Let me think. I think that one podcast I listened to, man, because I listen to like I'm very eclectic, so like I listen to like supernatural podcasts about
Nice.
like ghost hunting and like I love The Office, so I listen to this podcast about The
Oh,
Office and like. So I mean, sorry, I don't know. Like, there's really nothing helpful I could probably tell anybody like in that area. But for me, I definitely read a lot of articles, that come out. I read I'm subscribed to Variety, so Variety sends a lot of articles and a lot of music industry related ones, like the recent sale of Taylor Swift's catalog and stuff. So I'll always read that stuff and just kind of keeping up with the news and kind of where everything is going. That's sort of my main source for entertainment news in general. So I'd recommend that.
Variety is a great resource for sure. Do you have any besides the book? So I'm gonna recommend the book. Like people should definitely pick this up. The Straightforward Guide to the Music Biz. So I'm really excited about that and start sharing that with people. But besides the book, do you have any asks of the audience or maybe challenges for the audience or something or any last words of wisdom?
I think that the main thing is to just start doing things. I think that I have a lot of friends who sort of sit around and say, oh, one day I'm going to do this, one day I'm going to do that. It's like with me with that book, I'm just like, I decided to write a book because I saw the need for it and I just did it. Yeah. I think you need to sort of just, life is short, just get out there, do what you want to do. If you want to record an album, do it. There's got to be a way to do it. I actually wrote and produced a movie a few years ago. It was like a small comedy horror thing. And it got distribution and all that. I mean, it came out on DVD. It's like a low budget deal. Cool. But it was just one of those things that like, it was a goal of mine. And I say like, there's a lot of people who just, they have these dreams, but you just have to really put it into action. So I'm the kind of person who's like, yeah, I have a dream. I'm going to try for it. And I recommend everyone do that. Like make a plan. Don't just let it be an abstract dream. And I think some people just do that to get themselves through the day, just to have something to kind of daydream about. But I'm not that kind of person. I want results, like I want to get out there. I want to do it. And, I decided to write that book a few months ago and here I am on a podcast with you promoting it. That's just what it is. So make a plan, execute the plan and just do your best. And, don't sit around and wait for things to happen for you.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love that. That's a great message. And then before I ask you the last question, just thanks so much for taking the time, being on the podcast, for giving me an hour of your day. I know you're probably busy with clients and Thanksgiving's tomorrow. And just thanks for putting this book out into the industry, into the world. It's a really great guide. I feel like there needs to be more books and more content for our industry. And I just love that it's out there. And I'm definitely will be an advocate for it and will promote it to my students and people on the podcast.
Oh, thanks. Really appreciate it. And, I have a website. It's kamalandrew.com. People can have links to buy the books at different outlets there. So it's Kamal Andrew, KamalAndrew.com. And, you can find the links for Amazon, Apple, iBooks, and all that there.
Awesome. Are you on social media too?
Yeah. If you actually go to that site, there's links to my social media on there as well.
Cool. I'll throw all those links as well in the show notes for this episode. And then the question I ask everyone at the end is, what is your definition of making it?
My definition of making it. It's funny because it changes over the time. I remember when I was 18 years old, came out to LA, it was like, I want to have a hit record on the radio. And then now it's like, I want to make a living for my family, so it's definitely, it's changed, now that I'm older. I think making it really is just, I think just feeling proud and happy with what you're doing in life. There's definitely more successful music attorneys than me. There's less successful ones. I don't like to compare myself to other people because you're just going to drive yourself crazy that way. There's always going to be somebody more successful and further along than you. But I'm definitely at a place where I feel just happy doing what I'm doing. And I love getting up and doing it every day. And I think that to me, that's success, right? Finding something that you really love doing, or what's that old saying? If you find something you love doing, you never have to work another day in your life. So I think I encourage people definitely just get out there and find something they love doing and then hopefully turn that into a job somehow. And I think that's making it. That's really success.